afternoon, folks. We're going to go ahead and we're running about an hour late. So we're going to go ahead and start with our next speakers. And I want to introduce again Mr. Jose Sierra, Mr. Arnulfo, and they'll do their presentation now. Thank you.
Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. Psalms 133, verse 1. Good afternoon, my name is Arnulfo Sierra. I'm a descendant of Jose Narciso Cavazos, an original Spanish language grantee in 1792. I am from Far, Texas. I first want to thank our Lord in bringing all of us together safely and in unity to this meeting. On behalf of Joe Sierra, Elmer Sierra, Paul Sierra, Agustin Moreno, and myself, from Two Countries, One Life, we want to thank Mr. Frank Rubio for inviting us to this conference. We also thank all of you for coming here to listen to our presentation, A New Direction on the Injustice of All Land Grants, Spanish and Mexican, given in California, Arizona, excuse me, New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, Florida, and all the other states where these land grants were involved. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, Joe Sierra or myself will not be able to give our speeches as we normally present them. They will be shorter, but if anybody has any questions, we'll be happy to answer them after the meeting. This presentation might seem too radical to some of you, but in reality is the simple truth. Be prepared to view and hear a history that has never been told about our ancestors' land grants, how they were taken away from them. We need to unite from California to Florida and all the states in between. No land grants left behind. We need to share with each other, not bicker with each other. Our strength is in unity. This is very important in rectifying the injustice. We need to unite and awake the dormant Hispanic vote to a level that has never been seen. This is very important. There is a very good chance that 2 Supreme Court justices will be retiring. They're going to be replaced by the next president to be elected. And our case will be going to the Supreme Court. Make no mistake about that. The Lord works righteousness and justice to all of the oppressed. Psalms 103, verse 6. Please write your questions down and ask us after our presentation is done, and we will answer them. Thank you very kindly. And now I present to you Jose Sierra Jr., our spokesperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnulfo. Hello, my name is Jose Sierra Jr. and myself, and Arnulfo Sierra, who just introduced himself, Elmer Sierra. We make up 3 of the heads of the organization called Two Countries, One Life. Let me explain to you what this logo is. Two countries, one life. Dos países, una mentira. The American flag is one of the countries represented, and the Mexican flag is represented as the second country. And the one lie that they told was that your ancestors were U.S. citizens and they had full rights. Let's be clear about this. I'm going to ask you guys to come to the the front a little bit because there's going to be some important stuff you want to read, and you'll be squinting from back there. Please come to the front a little bit. I know this is uncalled for, and this is, but this is important because you're going to hear the whole story of how your ancestors lost their lands, why they lost their lands, and who was responsible for them losing their lands. You're going to be shocked. You're going to be upset. You're not going to be happy at the end of this presentation because what you're going to hear is the truth. And sometimes the truth is not easy to take. But it needs to be said. It needs to be revealed. Next slide. Again, this is our names. We are two countries, one lie. Let me ask before I start, and I know these guys were out my last meeting, so please hold on. Don't tip them off. What country or what person do you think is responsible for this whole debacle about land grants being lost? Does anybody have a clue? And yes, it's not the United States that did the dirty work.
England.
England?
Yes, sir.
Great Britain? That's a good guess. That's a good guess.
I can prove it.
Good guess. Well, hang on to your presentation. Let us get ours first.
How about Spain?
Anybody else?
Germany?
Germany. Oh, yeah. You know this already. This is the man that was responsible for your ancestors in the worst crime that was committed. And this crime is fraud that was put upon a generation of our ancestors. He's not the man that did the dirty works. He's the reason that the dirty works were done. And I'm going to prove it to you today. This presentation has only been seen in 7 locations in Texas. This is the first time we've taken it out of Texas. And the truth be told, at the end of this meeting, you're going to tell me if I'm right, if I'm wrong. I'm going to give you the scene, the scene of the crime, and I'm going to show you a body. I'm going to show you a weapon. I'm going to show you the blood, and I'm going to say, okay, there was a crime committed. You tell me who's the villain. And I think at the end of this presentation, you're going to draw the same conclusions we have. But understand one thing. This is a case that you've never heard. Before I start, I want to give homage to my primo in El Paso, Texas, Fidencio Gonzalez. He's the reason I'm standing here today. When I was about 20 years old, I'm 67 now, he was the one who said, you need to get involved. You need to help us as a people. And for 40 years or so, I followed his lead. But I didn't capture this whole crime scene till about a year ago, after all the research that I've done. I was like most of you, off on a tangent. Now you're going to hear the real truth. Next slide. This is about Spanish and Mexican land grants, which most of you are all aware of. And by the way, there are 3 references and sources that we are going to talk about today. Most of these references, material that we have, were captured from the websites. A lot of it was from the State Department website. You'll understand why in a minute. And a lot of it was in the library, and also one more, the Library of Congress. So we have done a lot of homework on this. But these numbers, 1765 to 1846, vary depending on which history book you open, depending on which article you read, but it's basically all about the same. This is not significant of when exactly it all started. It's significant is that you know your ancestors were alive and they owned land. Because in those days, wealth was land. It wasn't Ferraris or I got a big house. It was the land that made you wealthy. Next slide. Unfortunately, this word is going to be depicted in a dim light. There's a reason, but I'll get to that. The Mexican-American War started in 1846, ended in 1848. The only thing important or significant here is to let you know that the United States did not hold friendly to Mexican or Spanish-speaking people. At that time, I'm sure you've heard of Manifest Destiny. I'm sure you heard about a lot of the history back then. There was a lot of institutionalized discrimination, a lot of prejudice against Mexicans, and I'll prove it to you in a second here. But understand one thing, this is the war that was probably the culmination of getting the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty, and that treaty was because of the unrest and problems they had with Mexico. Next slide. This is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We have this on our t-shirts. We sell these t-shirts for $10 for donations, in case you're wondering. We'd like to have some gas money to get back. And also, remember the date, because the date is to talk to you like a teacher here, so please don't feel that I'm talking down. I'm trying to get you to understand a lot about the legalities of it. You've never been told in the history of that I know of Texas, or New Mexico, or any other state. February 2nd, 1848. And this was when Mexico and the United States got together, and the United States said, we gotta have this. We need this land. They had an agenda. Yes, Mexico basically gave it away. I know they got paid, but boy, I'm sure they wish they had that choice to do over again. Next slide. This is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. In here is a more or less an explanation of what was happening at the time. As you can see, I don't want to go into detail because my presentations run long. They run almost an hour and a half to 2 hours, and I've been told to shorten it up a little bit. In here, just understand one thing, that this is basically a concept of how the place looked at that time, how Texas looked, how Mexico looked, how the United States looked, how California looked, Arizona, New Mexico. It was about a word called hostilities. Okay, understand that. But these underlined paragraphs are important. Other provisions stipulated the Texas border of the Rio Grande, Article 5, protection for the property and civil rights of Mexican nationals. That's what you were called if you were alive and your ancestors were that. They were alive and they were there. Mexican nationals living within the new border. The U.S. promised to police inside the border and compulsory arbitration of future disputes between the two countries. Article 21, this is all in the Treaty of Hidalgo, Guadalupe. It's online, you can read it. It's all over the place. When the U.S. Senate ratified the treaty in March, it reduced Article 9 and Article 10 and Article 9 and 10, the protection that your ancestors were getting. These ancestors were your grandfathers were removed 5 or 6 times, and your grandmothers removed 5 or 6 times. So this article was reduced, diluted is a better word in my opinion, guaranteeing the protection of Mexican land grants. That's what they were. Because you got to remember, Spain had already been kicked out, Mexico took over, and now the United States and Mexico are dealing with the land. Following the Senate's ratification, the U.S. treaty, U.S. troops left Mexico City. Okay, next slide. This is an article that was taken off the internet. It's by a man named Richard Goodman. He had a presentation that he gave on the Treaty of Hidalgo, Guadalupe, at the University of Texas. I don't remember what year it was. Oh, 1977. But why I have it in here is significant because this paragraph right here really tells you the whole story. Mexican concerns for security of their lands proved to be well-founded as the treaty ushered in decades of land seizures, squatting, and violence from the Anglo-Settlers, who felt their victory in the war entitled them to Mexican-owned land. It was a God-given right. I was an Anglo, you're a Mexican, that's my land. Despite treaty guarantees, many Mexicans were forced off their land by laws and courts prejudiced against them within decades Mexican Americans went from holding a clear majority of the land in the region to owning almost none at all. This man is, and to the best of my knowledge, is not a Mexican. He's an Anglo, telling the truth. He's some kind of professor at the University of Texas. What he's telling you is your ancestors didn't have a chance. Understand the tone and the mood of the nation at that moment in time, because now you're going to see what they had to face. It's not about yelling now. You can yell now. Yeah, everybody can hear you now. Try it back then and see how long you lived. See how long you lived with your family on a land that they wanted, and there was no laws to protect you. You have to remember, your ancestors couldn't read or write English. They couldn't even speak English. They were very vulnerable. They were vulnerable to the point where they didn't even understand the system, and now they're U.S. citizens? Wow. Think about that for you today. How overwhelming that would be. How amazingly difficult that would be. Next slide. In here I talked about the treaty. You can find this online. There actually has English passages and Spanish passages. You can't, if you can't read or write English, they have them in Spanish too. And in here, this article tells you basically the protections that they guaranteed or were going to guarantee your ancestors. But I'll cut to the chase because I've been told to chop it down a little bit. Those who shall prefer to remain in the said territories may either retain the title of rights of Mexican citizens, own this land, which they did. You could stay on the land or you could go back to Mexico. You had a choice, but you had to give a decision within 12 months. And if it didn't give a decision, they shall be under the obligation to make their election within 1 year from the date of the exchange of ratifications of this treaty. And those who shall remain in the said territories after the expiration of that year, without having declared their intention to retain the character of Mexicans, shall be considered to have elected to become citizens of the United States. Keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to this, and you're going to see how the United States is going to commit the biggest fraud in history. And it's going to involve your family. So pay attention, because there will be a test. And that test is for you to comprehend and have to tell your family, because it's going to be important. The ratification in that year, which they did. But guess what? Before they voted on it, they didn't like a couple of items because it gave protection to your ancestors. Gee, right? Well, let's read a little bit. The version of the treaty ratified by the United States Senate eliminated Article 10. All websites, find yourself the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. You go read it and see what Article 10 said. Which stated that the U.S. government would honor and guarantee. Boy, those are big words, aren't they? 2 words. Honor and guarantee. Don't you wish you had that when you bought a car? That they would honor it and guarantee it. That Mexicans who remain for more than 1 year in the ceded lands would automatically become full-fledged United States citizens. Oh, I skipped a sentence. All land grants awarded to land ceded to the U.S. citizens of Spain and Mexico. Yes, Spain. My ancestors were Spaniards. Yes, there was Mexican and Spanish land grants. There was actually American land grants too. I don't know how that came in there, but they were actually Mexicans because they wanted to populate the area. What's interesting about this is that you know and we know that you are now a U.S. citizen, and they're guaranteeing you that you will be United States citizens. They can declare their intention of remaining Mexican citizens. However, the Senate modified Article 9, changed the first paragraph, and excluding the last 2. Among the changes was that Mexican citizens would be admitted at the proper time to be judged by the Congress of the United States instead of admitted as soon as possible. as negotiated by a man named Trist and the Mexican delegation. Trist was the representative that negotiated for the United States with the Mexican delegation. And basically he was saying, look, we had this guarantee, we're going to dilute it. These Mexicans, we just had a war with them. Nobody liked Mexicans, let's be honest. Let's call it the way it was in those days. The Anglos talked with their 6 guns and the Mexicans ran for the hills. Let's call it what it was. It was a very dangerous time to be alive in those areas. Next page. To show you how the mood didn't change, this is the Greaser Act. Anybody ever hear of this law called the Greaser Act? Well, you better get used to telling your friends this is what they thought of Mexicans in 1855. The Greaser Act was an anti-Mexican law enacted in 1855 in California. Thinly disguised as an anti-vagrancy statute, the law defined a vagrant as all persons who were commonly known as greasers, or the issue of Spanish and Indian blood. That's a law in 1855. That's 70 years after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Can you hold the question to the end because I've been told to speed it up? I'm sorry.
I just want to know if they called it the Greaser Act. Did they use that word, greaser?
I got this out of an encyclopedia.
Okay.
That's how it's put. You got to remember, there was no political correctness back in those days.
No.
They called it the way it was. Next slide. From 1848, that's when the Treaty of Guadalupe was enacted, ratified in Congress, hollowed out because they didn't want to protect the Mexican people too much. Because they wanted that land. Let's be honest. They wanted that land. From 1868 to 1934, this is an actual U.S. and Mexican Claims Commission, and it was organized by Mexico and the United States in 1868. Guess what their job was? Their job was to take all of the complaints from people that were upset, mad, or lost their lands through either chicanery, and chicanery is an interesting legal term. It's used as deception or trickery. You think our Mexican ancestors or Spanish ancestors weren't tricked? You think they knew the system well enough where they could, deal with the Anglo on even turf? Not likely. Okay. So 1868 to 1934, these complaints were just hitting the door, man. They were coming in. People were, oh, by the way, your ancestors, who do you think they were complaining to the most? You see, when they came to the United States, they say, hey, you got a court system here. Somebody wronged you? What's today's world all about? Take them to court. Oh, great. I'm a Mexican, I'm a Spaniard, can't speak English, don't know how to read or write it, and you want me to take somebody to court? In the United States, no longer Mexico or Spain, you want me to go to this country and do something like that to someone that has wronged me? How successful do you think they were when they were talking to an Anglo judge and 12 Anglos in a jury?
Not so much.
You see, the odds were stacked against them. They didn't have a chance. Your ancestors tried, and by the way, we have court documents where they did try. They paid crooked lawyers. They took their hard-earned money and they wanted justice. They couldn't speak English. They couldn't read English. They couldn't write English. They tried. That's more what we're doing today as a people. We're not even trying as a people. Yeah, I know there's groups of individuals, but as a people, let's be honest. We're not. Next slide. During that time, this was the President of the United States. His name was Calvin Coolidge, and this was the President of Mexico. Oh my God. These two men, by the way, this poor guy here died. He didn't last long. There was a lot, Mexico was in turmoil. They had a lot of revolutions going on. They had a lot of killings, and sometimes the presidents would be killed. I mean, not much different than this country, let's be honest. We've had that problem too. But anyway, these two guys were in charge of starting to figure out how do we solve this problem. 1848, here we are, we're going into the 1900s. Everybody's still complaining. They got robbed. They got their land stolen, this and that. And I asked you earlier, where do you think your were going? They were going to Mexico. Why were they going to Mexico? Because in the United States, they didn't have a chance. They tried, but they kept losing, and it was costing them money. And then they would get shot and also hung, and we have pictures of that. I don't want to try to shock you into anything, but your ancestors had a lot of things against them, and one of them was murder. They were murdered. Yes, they were. They were hung to show on their land that if you wanted to stay and you owned land, that was going to happen to you if you didn't leave, or if you didn't sell them your land for pennies on the dollar. Because they were not exactly honest people in those times. There were a lot of thievery, chicanery, and a lot of wrong things going on. Next one. So what happens is in 1923, they finally said, you know what, enough's enough. We got to do something. God, how to right this wrong. Wow, both countries agree. We have to right this wrong. You can't get a fair trial in the United States. And guess what? We have documents from the Library of Congress to show your ancestors were actually filing those claims. And they tried to get their land back or the compensation amount of money that their land was worth. So this is all documented. And I had one guy say, you know what, your presentation isn't exactly 100% correct. I said, really? Why not? He goes, you see that logo up there? There was no United Nations in 1923. Ah. He said, you know what? You're absolutely right. It was the League of Nations, I think, back then. I said, but you know what? That's how I found it. I found that in the archives and whatever. He goes, well, it's wrong. There was no United Nations. So that made me think, and I went researching it. And then I found it. I think it's coming up here. Next slide. In this convention of 1923, that's what it was called. We'll get to the United Nations in a minute. It had articles, 1 through I think it's 9 or 11 or something like that. And in those articles is like the ground rules of how we're going to treat your ancestors. Because you see, they're trying to right a wrong. Wow, history is turning, hopefully, for the best for our ancestors. And in this articles of this General Claims Convention of 1923, I'll just read the red for you. There's a lot to read here. The total amount awarded in all these cases decided in favor of the citizens of one country shall be deducted from the total amount awarded to the citizens of the other country. And the balance should be paid in Washington or in the city of Mexico in gold coin or its equivalent to the government of the country in favor of whose citizens had the greater amount they have been awarded. Gold coin. They're going to pay us in gold. Wow, you see, what you don't know is they did a lot of work in that 1923 convention. They did a lot of work. They created a little booklet like this. I just have a few of these left. We sell these for $20 and it's just a donation. You probably have a hard time finding this. This is a very difficult copy. But if you know your ancestors' original Langren name, you can find his porciones here, and you can see what the government of Mexico and the United States thought was a fair market value of 1923, and they put a number to it. Some of these Langren original grantees, I mean, you're in the millions of dollars, and that's 1923 money. Okay, so these books were created by the U.S. government and the Mexican government. But you remember I told you this was a United Nations treaty? Remember that? United Nations actually said. There was no United Nations, but they sent one representative from the Hague, Netherlands. And that man was a referee to make sure that what both countries did to those people was right. And it was to be established because the people didn't have a say in this. This was just two countries saying, what's the fair market value for Longoria's Langren? And they come up with a number and they say, yeah, that's a fair assessment. Boom. They put a number on it. And they say that's what's going to be paid for that land grant in gold coin. I don't know if any of you even knew that before, but there's a lot of mystery to how the United States and Mexico dealt with our ancestors that you are finding out today. In the event that the government affected should elect to pay the amount fixed as the value of the property or right decree to be restored, it is agreed that the notice thereof will be filed with the commission within 30 days after the decision, and that the amount fixed as the value of the property or right shall be paid immediately. Two governments are writing something that has to be done immediately? The United States and Mexico? Upon failure so to pay the amount of the property or right, what this is telling you is they had ground rules of how to get your families the money that they owed you, because they admitted what was done to you was wrong. And if you ever, Elmer Sierra had gone, he just came back from this summer, you would find that you will find your ancestors, some of your ancestors, names fought for the right to be able to be compensated for their land that was stolen. Next page. This is the book I was showing you. Shows you portion number. This is a copy of the original. There's two copies. And yes, some names are not in one book, but they're in the other, because these were written by hand, and they were written in Mexico City by the Mexican government and the United States. Those two copies, one is in the Library of Congress, the other one is in Mexico City. You can find this information, but it's not easy. They don't make it easy for you to get smart. In here, they have a portion number, that's the land grant number. Over here, they have the name, then they have the location of the land, quantity of acres, and the value between 1932 to 1941. As you can see, some of these get to be hefty numbers. That's money in 1923. My land grant ancestor was Jose Narcisco Cavazos. He owned 605,000 acres. In this book, he was to get $12 million in 1923, which would be billions of dollars in today's money. But he never got it. None of these other people got it. Next slide. From 1923 to 1934, nobody got a dime. Nobody. Two countries had admitted that there was a wrongdoing, and they even put a number on everybody's land and said, we're going to pay them in 30 days and gold coin when they get their land back. Nobody got the number. And I can only draw a conclusion. Because nobody cared. They were just Mexicans at that time. You got to remember, the world was different than it is today. You have rights today. I don't think you had many rights then, and I still think we don't have many rights now. But in 1934, something very unusual happens. Let me tell you something. You need to understand this. This man is important. You probably don't even know who he is. Some of you may have heard of him, but you need to understand who this man was, and what he did was important in your case, because it's going to tie into the biggest fraud ever committed on a generation of Mexican-American people. Is this history in a history book anywhere? You won't find it written just like I told you. But if you look hard enough, you get little snippets of history, and then you can put it together, and you say, whoa, hold on now. So Cardenas was elected president. What's unusual about this? You got to remember, Mexico had all of our ancestors going to them, and they're saying, help us. Help us. The United States won't pay us. They even had a treaty in 23 with your country. They're telling Cardenas, and they still didn't pay us. But they admitted everybody was wrong. Well, let's see the next page. Let's see about this man, Cardenas. Cardenas, okay. I'm not great at names this time. Up here, this is the general election of 1934. Lázaro Cárdenas had 2,225,000 votes. His nearest competitor, Antonio Villarreal, 24,000. Would you say that was close? Boy, I'd like to win an election like that. That is a serious landslide, man. Because they love Cardenas. Next page. This is the reason they love this man. Did you go a bunch of it? There we go. This man was a hero. He fought in the 1917 Revolutionary War with Pancho Villa and Zapata. He was with the Mexican government. He fought against the Zapatistas. This man was a hero to the people. And you know what? He was a pretty nice guy. He was a pretty good man. The problem with this guy is he had principles. In a country today, principles are not good to have if you're going to be a powerful person. Because corruption is always around the corner. And testing, as you will see, it's going to test him. 2,225,000, the guy like I had 25. Landslide! What year was it? 1934. The guy's an amazing human being. When he was elected, they had parades in the street. He was a hero to these people. Next page. This man turns around and he does the unthinkable. He goes and takes the land from the rich in Mexico and gives it to the poor. Now, before you say, what's that got to do with mine? Just bear with me. You're going to get there. This man wanted to change Mexico. He wanted to do the right things for these people. One of the first things he did, created an 8-hour workday. Pretty amazing man to do that in those days, 1934. Second thing he did, he says if this country is going to be successful in the future, we need more teachers and we need smarter kids. Wow, 1934, this guy's talking this way? Man, politicians, he can't even talk that way today. He was ahead of his time. Now you know why they liked him so much. Because he was for the people. But he had problems. And one of the problems he had was American industry. Mexico was loaded with American industry. They found oil in 1925 in Mexico. 1921, 1925. One of those years. And oil was just coming out of the ground, and oil was making Mexico wealthy. Sound familiar? You better believe it, because oil is what this is all about. You're going to see that times haven't changed, that things are different, but they're still the same. Anybody want me to stop now? You interested? Are you interested?
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I thought. Let's just come to the rest because they're going to be yelling at me and then you get off the stage. The legislation for nationalization provided for compensation for the expropriated assets, but Cardenas' actions angered the international business community and Western governments, especially the United Kingdom. Why were they mad? Because on March 18, 1938, Cardenas nationalized Mexico's petroleum reserves and expropriated the equipment of the foreign oil companies in Mexico. Why did he do that? Because you see, he was for his people. I have all these documents. I don't have time to show them all to you. But he got in a big argument with the oil companies, and he filed suit in the courts of Mexico against the U.S. and British Petroleum, Shell, Dutch oil companies, because they didn't want to pay those yet. And Cardenas says you can't do that. He filed a lawsuit, and it went to the Mexican Supreme Court, and he won against the oil companies. It's kind of hard to believe, isn't it? You think I'm lying? Watch. Mexico was eventually able to restart the oil fields and refineries. Well, we did a little ahead of ourselves. There's a lot of things that happened between 1938 and 1942, so let me stop here. You've got to remember, he had had enough with the foreign interest in Mexico in 1938. He was one of the heroes in 1934. 2 million votes! By 1940, he wouldn't even run for re-election. They're going to get rid of him because they couldn't take him anymore. What happened? Why would he not be reelected? The man was so popular. He was the people's president. When he kicked out the oil companies in 1938, they had a parade in Mexico City. For 6 hours, over 100,000 people were cheering him in 1938. Don't believe me? Go online, go on your computer, and type in Google or, whatever. Type in 1938 Oil Expropriation, put down that, and see, you can actually see the parade. They have a film of it that was live at the time. The sound is not very good, but you can see all the people. And they were ecstatic because he finally stood up for them in 1938. But a man so popular, there, 6-hour parade in Mexico City. Oh my God, this guy was a hero. But Mexico was eventually able to restart the oil fields because what do you think the oil companies did when they left? They started destroying everything, and he said, hey, leave everything alone. You cannot take one thing with you in 1938. Leave everything here. The only thing you're allowed to take with you, he's talking to the American and foreign companies, is the clothes on your back. They were ready to destroy the equipment, to sabotage him for doing what he did. You see, Mexico had just nationalized the oil wells and the oil fields, and they no longer had an interest legally in those oil wells anymore. Royal Dutch Shell, British Petroleum, they weren't called that, but that's still we're talking about. Standard Oil, oh yeah, they were there. They were furious. Why were they furious? Because Mexico can't do that. It's illegal. You just can't take this and nationalize it. You have no right. They go back. Guess who they're talking to now? A guy named FDR. Next page. We already saw this. Next page again. This has turned into a major problem because you see, Cardenas was, I told you, a principled man. He wasn't backing down. But the oil companies were out to destroy him. They wanted a war with Mexico in 1938. You probably didn't know that. They not only wanted a war, they wanted the United States to go down and reclaim the land and oil companies for the oil companies. 1938. Were we at war then? No, we weren't at war. FDR didn't, he had enough problems. What was going on in 1938? How about a depression? How about a depression going on? Did FDR have time and did he want to have all this on his plate? He had homeless people. He had people starving in the United States in 1938. Soup lines. The oil was the issue. This man's name is Cordell Hull, Secretary of State. This was FDR's Secretary of State. In the Wikipedia or any encyclopedia you go to, they will explain to you that this is the longest running Secretary of State in history. Does anybody know why? Nobody can ever beat his record. Because Roosevelt ran and won 4 terms. Can't do that anymore. I wasn't alive then. I don't know why he changed the law, but it was changed after FDR died. So Cordell Hull had been there forever. This man was a powerful man. He was the Secretary of State. You're going to hear about this because your ancestors are going to be dealing with this man. This is the man who won. There was 4 men involved. I'm going to show you their names in a minute. But this is the guy that wanted a war with Mexico. The problem is what's going on that you don't even know. Let me read this here. This is about Cardenas. He started Pemex. He did a lot of good things for his people in Mexico. The U.S. government responded with a policy that backed efforts by American companies to obtain payment for their expropriated properties. You know what expropriated means? In the dictionary, it means taken. Maybe you didn't want to give it to them, but they took it, and they kept it. That's called expropriation. But supported Mexico's right to expropriate foreign assets as long as prompt and effective compensation was provided. U.S. FDR is telling them, "Look, I don't got a problem with you taking that, but make sure you pay those oil companies." Why? Why did FDR say that? Because it was 1938. And you remember that guy at the beginning of the thing we showed you, the man responsible? He was starting wars all over the place in Europe. And Churchill was telling FDR, "You better get ready. This guy is going to drag you into a war." So FDR and this guy were worried about Hitler. Because you see, let's be honest, it was a difficult time for the United States, or any country, if they were involved. Next page. Why did Franklin Delano Roosevelt, no friend of the oil men, defend their interests? Oil was not a strategic commodity to Washington in 1938. The U.S. was still self-sufficient and imposed tariffs and lower-cost foreign suppliers to protect U.S.-based producers. Franklin Delano Roosevelt therefore had little to lose and slightly more to gain in using the power of the United States to pressure the Mexican government. Moreover, the expropriation gave Franklin Delano Roosevelt a credible excuse to threaten to suspend silver price supports. Why was he thinking about doing that to Mexico? If they didn't keep the price of silver high, Mexico lived off that silver for their people, they were going to be in trouble. So they said, want to play that game? We can do the same problem, same thing you. Britain, unlike America, vitally depended on its oil lifeline for Mexico, particularly in light of the German military buildup. What has that got to do with our ancestors? Boy, you're going to find out. Because you're going to hear a piece of history that's never been told. You see, what's going to happen is going to be a very big test for the United States. And the United States is going to have to come up with something. Next slide. I told you there was 4 men involved with your ancestors. Remember these guys' names. Cordell Hull. In here it tells you about him. He was Secretary of State. He's also he called him the father of the United Nations. He got a Nobel Peace Prize in 45. He established the United Nations in 1945. Okay, next guy is Benjamin Sumner Wells. He was the Undersecretary of State for this guy, Cordell Hull. Henry Morgenthau Jr. was also the Secretary of Treasury. Why would the Secretary of Treasury be involved with a treaty? Because someone's got to write a check. That check's got to have some money in it. They got to get the Secretary of Treasury involved. And this last man is Josephus Daniels. He was ambassador to Mexico. These are the 4 men that are going to come up out of figuring out a plan or a scam that's going to involve your ancestors because of what's about to happen. I think I got the stage set pretty well for you to understand that FDR is in trouble. He's got Churchill talking to him in one ear. Next slide. And he's got oil companies yelling at him in the other. There's 3 books that I show you here. These are on the line. You can find them at Amazon, eBay, whatever. I recommend all 3 books if you really are interested in how this part of the history is about to change. But this is the book I tell you. This book's $100. Don't buy it for $100. You can get it used for $10. I paid $10 for mine. This book was written by a man named Kenneth A. Rodman. He's a professor out of Vermont. Well-regarded, smart dude. He did a case study, and he gave a full report. This book's almost like a textbook. It tells you why things were done that you didn't even know were happening. Here it comes. There's more to the story. Why would Cordell Hull say, "Hey, I want a war with Mexico"? And Morgenthau say, "Whoa, can't do that." Messages. And by the way, they're in the memoirs from Cordell Hull. You can find it in the Library of Congress. They were being told, if you push Mexico too hard, two things are going to happen. Mexico was neutral in 1938, and Mexico didn't want to side with anybody. They wanted to make money on oil. There's only one little problem. 1938, Mexico was the second largest producer in the world of oil. And guess who they were number 2 in selling oil to? The Nazis. You better believe it. They were selling the oil to the Nazis because the Nazis were buying oil like there was no tomorrow. They had a machine, and that was the war machine, and they give me all the oil you can. Mexico says, you got it. Why? Because you got to remember the oil companies were already still mad at Mexico, and they were running embargoes, boycotts. They were choking off Mexico to make it go to its knees and come back and plead with the oil companies to come back. And I told you, Cardenas was not going to do that. He was a man of principle, and he was going to ride that horse till it dropped. So we had all kinds of dynamics going on, but there's one more thing you don't know that you need to know. Japan, Italy, and Germany were going all over the world, buying up all the raw material from Latin American countries. Don't believe me? Look at this book. Actually, all 3 books have it. Pardon me? I don't understand.
Who are all the countries that were?
The 3 axes of evil. Japan, Germany, and together on a world at war. They were going to other countries. They were buying copper. Copper? What would you do with copper in a war? Bullets? Well, you better believe it. How much did the United States pay them? Oh, $1.10 a ton or whatever, a pound? We'll give you 50 cents more. Man, they were ready. They were beating out Britain. Not like that. Why? Because they're being outbid everywhere in Latin America. They didn't like that. That Germany, Japan, and Italy were smart enough to say, well, if you're not going to give the right price, we'll give more. And they'll come to us. And they were going to them. But there was another problem. You see, there was 2 countries that were watching this very closely. You don't even know who they are, but I'm going to tell you. Libya and Venezuela. Why would they be watching all this in 1938? Because if Mexico could get away with taking the oil companies and kicking them out, they were going to do it too. So there was a lot riding on this in 1938. Put yourself in FDR's shoes now that you know more of what was really going on that you've never heard of. This book tells you the whole story of the world entry into this whole expropriation because it was an amazing influence on the strategy of these countries to figure out what to do to keep all of the Latin American countries from nationalizing their oil wells, because the United States had oil companies saying, if you let Mexico get away with it, they're all going to do it. We'll be bankrupt. Geez, Standard Oil, British Petroleum, I feel so. But that was the threat, and that was real, man. That was a real threat to these people. Because, you see, if they didn't do something, the world was going to react. Now, you get in the stage a little bit and say, what's that got to do with your ancestors? Everything. Because you are about to be, as an original grantee, you are about to be catapulted in the biggest scam in United States history since 1941. Anybody want me to stop? Getting bored? Falling asleep? All right, let's keep going. Next page. I'm going to show you 2 excerpts to get you a tone of what's going on in these books. This is one excerpt. Now I'm going to read it to you. In June 1940, Cardenas offered the United States an escape. An escape? Wow, things were that bad for FDR? Were we at war in 1940? No. Why would he be given an escape? You see, you're going to see the pressure is immense on FDR. He proposed a Mexican-American Joint Claims Commission rather than arbitration to evaluate the company's property for the purpose of compensation. To who? The oil companies. Because Cardenas is dying in Mexico. His people are pissed. Sorry. His people are angry. His people are mad because there's no work in Mexico. Production levels went from 100% to 40% in 2 years, 38 to 1940. There was no money coming in. Silver was being devalued by all the countries. Great Britain even sued Mexico at the World Court and lost because they were angry that they were giving the oil to the Nazis. What intrigue! You couldn't make this up. This could be on TV. My God! FDR, one of the greatest presidents we ever had. How embarrassing. What's about to happen here? What's going to happen, you're not going to like. Because it's the truth. Or we're concerned about the effect of sanction and stalemate on Mexico's economy and political position. Without a settlement, economic conditions were likely to foment an anti-U.S. insurrection or increased German influence by forcing Cardenas to move closer to the Axis. Wow! In other words, if you move too strongly in Mexico, side with the Nazis. Why? Because the Nazis are buying all the oil they can get. And Cardenas' people are starving because the world is boycotting them. The British are stopped giving them oil to the Germans. The strategic realities in Europe compelled the United States to redefine its interests away from corporate preferences for arbitration. It was more important to obtain a settlement, even if it compromised principle, than to allow relations to drift into a phase of strategic exigencies. Hull retreated from the insistence on binding arbitration and accepted Cardenas' proposal. Whoa! What does that mean? That means there's a deal coming. And they knew they had to make one. Next page. This is the other excerpt. Events in Europe compelled the State Department to give up its support for expansive cooperation in favor of compromise to promote hemispheric solidarity and military cooperation. By 1940, almost all government actors recognized that the Axis expansionism was a far more serious threat than economic nationalism. A common view emerged that an economically strong and politically stable Latin America was necessary to thwart German penetration. The United States consequently pursued a larger public assistance program. Public assistance program?
Right there. Right there. The New Deal.
What? A public assistance program with Germany and the Nazis and Mexico? You couldn't make this stuff up, folks. I'm telling you. The United States consequently pursued a larger public assistance program to prevent its southern neighbors from succumbing to the organized economic and ideological campaign of the Nazis. What I'm trying to tell you is this. They knew if they pushed Mexico too hard and said, give us that oil company, oil back, that if they jumped over to the Nazis, the Germans were already in Mexico. 6,000, this book is actually it's a textbook. He actually lectures and teaches students about what happened in that whole era. This, that there was so much at stake here than just oil, that it was Latin American countries ready to do the same thing as Mexico did, then it would have caused world chaos, and the Nazis would have been right on it. They captured, it's not in this book, but it's in another book. They actually captured a note coming from the Nazis to Cardenas' office. You know, in those days they had the FBI and the CIA and all that kind of stuff. But they actually intercepted that, and they said, if America does not deal with you right, we will help you. This is the Germans. We will send troops on the border of Mexico and the United States. We will send technical advisors so you can get those 40% oil wells back to 100%, because the Americans were not helping them in any way. Not till 1942, and I'll tell you why in a minute. You can see the stage is set. something's going to happen here. Something important is none of you are going to know about. None of you will ever hear about it until you put it together like the three of us did and say, oh my God, what the heck just happened? Because we never knew this. Next page. 1940 came. I told you they couldn't wait to get rid of Cardenas because they sort of blamed Cardenas for backing everybody into a corner. They were starving in Mexico. They couldn't go up north to get a job. There was no jobs in the United States. People were in soup lanes on both sides of the country. I mean, the border. This man was elected president. He was a friend of Cardenas. He was also a hero. He was also a famous general in the same war, the Revolutionary War. And this man now is different than Cardenas. Because this man is a politician. He's not a man of principle like Cardenas was. In other words, Cardenas would go to his grave. He didn't care how many people died because he stood for his principles. This man says, hey, I'm going to cut a deal. Why would this guy cut a deal? Well, number one, Cardenas left the whole country in shambles. They had a huge deficit because silver was in the toilet. The whole world is boycotting Mexico. You didn't know that. This guy wrote a book. There's actually three books written about the whole episode. It is amazing history that's never been talked about. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be brought to the light now so everyone can see the real story. But this man basically has a bigger problem. He's got a country he's taken over in 1940. He's not at war. He's still neutral. But the United States is saying, don't sell oil to the Nazis. And he said, you're crazy. It's the only way I can make it. I gotta keep selling oil to the Nazis. Camacho refused to stop selling oil. So they came to him. You remember when Cardenas went to those guys and said, let's make a deal? Well, Cardenas didn't finish the deal. This guy's going to finish the deal. But I wasn't there and I can't show you this in writing, but I will ask you this question. If you were Camacho, what would you be saying? What's in it for me? If I make a deal, what's in it for me? Let me tell you what's going to be in it for him. You remember this book I showed you? Like friends, they total $193 million. $193 million. You can read it on there. Just make sure I get it back, because every time I hand one out, I make sure I get it back. $193 million land grants. That was the value of their monetary rate. And Cordell tells him, I want to make you a deal. Do you remember that treaty in 1923 that we made? Camacho says, no, I wasn't there in 1923. Well, the two countries made. Oh, yeah. The one that said that after this, nobody can open this up again. Once this treaty is done, it's done forever, and no one can ever see it. Well, you know what we did wrong? We didn't give the money to the people like we said we were going to do. Remember 30 days, gold coin was going to go to everybody? You guys read it. Those are actual words in this document. I didn't write them. I didn't make them up. These are documents that you can read right now. And this treaty of 1923 is about to change. And now comes your ancestors. Next slide. This man is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Manuel Avila Camacho, President of Mexico in 1940. And they are about to come up with a deal that is going to blow everybody's mind. Why? Are we in war in 1940? Not yet. Remember, Pearl Harbor wasn't until 41. So, this man and this man are about to make a deal that's going to affect everybody that was involved in the land grant that I know of. Next page. It's going to be called the United Nations Convention of 1941. Treaty between Mexico and the United States. Look it up. It's in the web. You can find it. Type it in. It'll pop right up. Let me share with you. The original treaty has like, I don't know how many volumes. To find this treaty in its real state in the archives. That man over there, Elmer Sierra, and look for these documents. Thousands of digital pictures. That's the only way you're going to copy any of the documents. Can't touch them. You're only allowed to take a picture. And he went and he searched for as many documents he could take copies of. Remember that, because I'm coming back to that in a minute. But this treaty is going to be special. There's only 2 agendas on this treaty. Look it up. You'll find it. You'll have a hard time, but you can do this. We did it. You're going to find there's only 2 items on the agenda. Oil companies, oil and land, compensation. And the other one is expropriated lands. Get those. Spanish and Mexican land grants that were stolen and that were compiled for years from 1868 to 1934. I showed you that was the convention that was going on. This treaty is going to resolve it once and for all. My God, finally, justice. We're going to get somebody to hear and fix the problem of your ancestors. I don't know if they fixed it, though. Did you guys get any monies? I don't remember. Okay, let's go further. Next one. In this convention of November 1945, were we at war?
Not yet.
December the 7th, 1941. We were not at war with anybody. In this is the whole language. Here's Cordell Hall's name again. Remember him? And even this guy's name is the head on it. They put a whole compiled treaty, put all the language in there to resolve the issue once and for all. For the wrong that was done to the American oil companies, and the wrong that was done to your ancestors. Look it up. Those are the only 2 agendas on that treaty. My God, we need a treaty just for that. Woo, something's going on here. In this, they talk about the money. They talk about the claims. All claims filed by the governments of the United States of America and the United Mexican States with the General Claims Commission established by the 2 countries pursuant to the convention signed September 8th. That's the old treaty that was cast in stone and couldn't change. How could they do that? This is 1940. Because they want to. If 2 countries agree to break their own rules, they can do it. It's legal to do that. But both countries have to agree. Why would Camacho agree to it? The oil companies are going to get compensated, and a whole bunch of Mexicans are going to get money that don't even live in this country. Why does he care? He cares because he's broke. Mexico's in trouble in 1940. They're struggling. Still selling oil to the Nazis. But read this. This is really, there's a lot to read here, and I got to get going. All other claims of nationals of either country which arose subsequent to 1927, prior to 40, and involving international responsibility of either government towards the government of the other one, as a consequence of damage to or loss or destruction of wrongful interference with property of the nationals of either country. This is nothing more than a disclaimer. Just saying, you know what, once this treaty's done, nobody can come back and complain and say they got a raw deal. This is done. We're done with this. FDR knew with the Nazi. I understand what he did and why I don't understand it. Nobody come back and said, we wronged these people, we need to right. It happened with the Japanese. It happened with other people. How come not us? More language, this is Article 3. The United States of America and the United Mexican States of this convention reciprocally cancel, renounce all claims of whatsoever nature of nationals of each country. Wow, man. In other words, don't mess with us anymore. That's it. You got a toenail broken, don't blame it on us. Nothing is going to deter this treaty from happening. And you are not going to be able to undo it. Plain and simple. Because they knew this was going to be a fraud on our ancestors. They knew our ancestors' nature. They knew who you are. You are Mexican nationals to them. You're not American citizens to them. And they know that you're not going to be like the black brothers and sisters and stand over there and riot. They knew your nature. They used it against you. They knew you were going to be able to just accept your fate and not complain too vigorously. So you see, the cast is, the die is cast. Next slide. Up here, this is pretty important here. Article 5. You can read this article if you can find it. And by the way, I'm going to tell you something. We felt it imperative that we start this campaign that we are doing right now, Two Countries, One Life, because we know that information is disappearing, and it's disappearing fast because you're getting smarter. To do this research, it was not easy. I'm going to tell you that right now. The resources we used were internet communications, and we used government websites, by the way, State Department website. They have a lot of information, but they don't say, oh, we messed your whole generation up. No, these little bits and pieces that you have to put together. They don't make it easy for you to understand what happened. Doing. Down here, in the event of failure to pay any annual installment, because they were going to give Mexico $193 million, which is the value of the land expropriation, and Mexico was going to give the oil companies $40 million. So the oil companies could shut up and get back to work on getting more oil because we got a war around the corner. Get the picture? This is what it is. In the event of failing to pay any installments or installments when due, the Mexican state shall pay interest. The interest, if they don't pay, at the rate of 1% per annum on the amount of each installment or installments from the date when the installments or installments became due up to the date of the payment. Guess what? That language is for the oil companies. There was no penalty for Mexico. It didn't give you the money. There was language in this treaty of 1941 that stated you have to pay the amount of money within an X amount of days or years. There was no language for your ancestors. Think about that for a minute. In other words, I'm going to give you $193 million, and all you got to do is give that lady over there $40 million, and you keep the rest. Oh, by the way, they're supposed to go to these people over here, but you know what? Checks in the mail. Was Camacho looking for a deal? You better believe he was looking for a deal, because he was in trouble in his country, and he needed to figure out how to get people back to work. And he needed money. So he said, you know what? I want this treaty. I want this treaty because he knew they were going to grease his palm. And he knew that he was going to come out fat and happy at the expense of our ancestors. It's a dirty deal, but this is the way it is in this world. And if you're not sharp on this stuff, if you're not watching for it, it gets buried in history. That's what happened, because none of you knew this before I walked in the door. Next one. This convention relating to the final adjustment of certain unsettled claims. In here it says, I'll read the red only, it annulled most of claims by U.S. and Mexican nationals. Which one were your ancestors? Were they U.S. nationals or Mexican nationals? Do you know? Against the other party's government, except for claims by U.S. oil. Here we go again. U.S. oil companies, wow. They had somebody in their court, didn't they? Too bad we didn't have anybody in ours. For property nationalized by the Mexican government, which remained to be determined by the future agreements, the convention came into effect April the 2nd, 1942. It was registered at the United States Treaty Series on March 26th. 1952, and that's why you saw a logo on that 23 treaty, because they adopted that treaty to the United Nations in 1952. It was all done after the fact to make it nice and legal.
Called ex post facto law, it's not legal.
Pardon me?
It's called ex post facto law in the Constitution, and it's not legal.
Okay, we're getting to there, brother. We're not quite done yet. The U.S. government wished to avoid further confrontation with Mexico at a time Franklin Delano Roosevelt was preparing to intercept to appease the Mexican government while assisting U.S. oil industry, decided to remit all debts by the Mexican government to the U.S. Wow! You better believe it. He didn't have to do nothing. They gave him the 40 million. They gave him 190. Now his whole debt is wiped. No debt. You think he's a hero now in this country? This president in Mexico was the most successful president in Mexican history. Look it up. It's written like that. He was the most aggressive president that was ever successful in any term of 6 years. And he did it at our ancestors' expense. So you see, next page. There's only one problem with this treaty. There's a problem. None of you knew it, but some of you did. And I'm saying that loosely because we all bit the cookie, but nobody ever snapped in the middle of it. We all knew something was wrong with this deal. We all knew somehow Mexico and the United States weren't on the up and up. We didn't know exactly how. That's why these land grants have been going on. People know this is wrong. We've been wrong, but nobody knows how to write. Ears fall off, and guess what you're going to know? The same thing your ancestors waited for, you're still waiting for. It's been 167 years. The problem with this is there's rules to treaties in the United States. Guess what? There's guidelines in the United States treaties. Oh my God. Rules? How can we follow rules when we're doing wrong things? Well, let's figure this out. Here's the problem with this treaty. There was a case here on a woman named Colbert. You can read this case. It's very famous. It's actually the only time the Supreme Court overruled itself. First time in history. First and only time. She killed her husband, accused of killing her husband in England, but there was a treaty between England and the United States. And she sued. She went to the Supreme Court and won. And here's what they ruled. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned the conviction and found that no agreement with a foreign nation can confer power of the Congress or any of their other branch of government which is free from the restraints of the Constitution. The court also stated that an international accord that is inconsistent with the U.S. Constitution is void. Void? What does void mean?
Nothing.
He's an ain't worth diddly squat. Whoa!
Those are the Mexico courts, by the way.
Oh my God! What do we do with this? How? I mean, help me out, man. Where are we going with this? Well, if our ancestors are U.S. citizens and they are violating their rights, we got a problem that you never knew about. Next slide. Here it is, folks. The Fifth Amendment, rights of people or persons. I don't care about the whole thing because I got to cut to the chase. But down here at the bottom of the Fifth Amendment, you can read it. It's on the web anywhere you look at it. It says, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or what? What did you say? Mr. Zoe? Let's read on. Without what? Due process.
Stop.
Oh, wait a minute. Of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just. Uh-oh. You getting it now? Your ancestors were found to be wronged in nature by the United States, and they gave $193 million to Mexico and said, we screwed them, we're sorry, here's the cash. You can keep it if you want, which he did. But your ancestors never got a dime. As far as I know, I'm still retired and I'm still broke. Nobody inherited millions in my family. So this is a problem now. Because you know what? If your ancestors are U.S. citizens, why are we even having this conversation?
We're Americans now. We're not U.S. citizens anymore. Our ancestors were U.S. citizens. We're Americans.
All right, bear with me, brother. Next slide. What's the year here? 1984? This case came in 1984. Way after the 1941 treaty. By the way, let's go back to that 41 treaty. If the United States gave $193 million, and by the way, if they gave $193 million to Mexico, and Mexico didn't give your ancestors a penny, what? It was a setup. You see, I read to you earlier, 1942, Mexico finally entered the war because Nazis sunk 2 oil tankers headed for Germany. You'll figure that one out. But if you look it up, Mexico had 2 oil tankers that were sunk by Germans, as reported by the United States. When Mexico sided with the United States and said we're at war with Germany, 1942. Up to that date, they were still selling oil to the Nazis. So all this is culmination now, and these people in Edinburgh, Texas, file a lawsuit. Amita Zarate and her daughter Yolanda Zarate. We just went to visit them about 2 weeks ago. She's 95 and still alive. She's doing great.